Welcome to the Streets and People podcast presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. Get Around Cabo Car Free is a volunteer community movement advocating for more transport options for people who can't drive in Caboolture and Morayfield in Queensland. In today's podcast, we'll be covering one of these three broad topics. It might be Road Rules 360, where we discuss Queensland's road rules, the legislation, the design for people walking, biking, in wheelchairs or on a scooter. It might be Not Everyone Drives, where we chat with people whose transport options don't include a car in a car-dependent society. And it might be People and Projects, where our conversations are with people working on a specific aspect of inclusive transportation. Today we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes. I have Phil Latz in the studio. I know Phil because we were both at the Australia Pacific Bike Riding Conference in Brisbane a few weeks ago. What he was telling me was wonderful to share on the podcast with our community here in Caboolture. I am calling from the land of the Gubbi Gubbi people in Queensland, just north of Brisbane. Phil, perhaps you would like to speak about what country or land you're calling from, what your project is.
Well, I'm in Wollongong, New South Wales, which is Dharawal country. I've got a few irons in the fire, so to speak. I've been involved in bicycle media full-time since 1989, if you like. I did some freelancing before that. I've been involved in consumer magazines, trade shows, book publishing, cycling guidebooks, including Where to Ride Southeast Queensland book 10 years ago or more. So a lot of publishing, a lot of advocacy, all sorts of bicycle advocacy and other advocacy work, quite a lot of charity work, World Bicycle Relief Australia. These days I do a couple of websites and newsletters and related activities on the cycling side, and I also coach bicycle businesses, so bicycle shops, other businesses as well. So always got a few irons in the fire, Wendy. Yeah, we're going to be launching the Micromobility Report podcast in about a month. We've actually recorded the first one. That will come out once a month, and the show notes for that will be on our Micromobility Report website.
My understanding is that your co-host is Irene McAleese. Irene gave the most fantastic presentation at the bike riding conference, and it was the very last session after 2 days of presentation after presentation after presentation. Everyone was pretty cooked by then. The presentation she gave was about a particular software that I think she has with somebody else, so it's not with you. I just thought, wow, that software would be amazing. You would fix all the potholes, all the bike crashes. I thought it was amazing, and I just was hoping Moreton Bay would do something like that and buy that product, because you can tell that people's lives are going to be saved with a product like that. And her presentation was amazing. Yeah. I was really impressed by her long-standing background, so I think you're going to have an amazing podcast on micromobility. Can you just tell me what micromobility is? What constitutes micromobility?
So the term has been around for a long time, but hardly used. There's a gentleman by the name of Horace Dediu, who is a Romanian-American futurist and tech expert, and he is, if you like, the one that really coined the term micromobility and got it back into popular use less than a decade ago. And different academics have put different specific definitions on it. My opinion is that the ultimate form of micromobility is actually walking, and that anything electric or non-electric, be it a bicycle, a skateboard, a scooter, a mobility scooter, they're all micromobility. Clearly what micromobility is not is heavy things or fast things. By definition, therefore, a car is not micromobility. We have a catchphrase, if you like, with the Micromobility Report: go further with less. So if it's something that helps you go further with less, probably is micromobility. And of course their micromobility dovetails beautifully with, if you like, active transport, which includes public transport, because clearly a train or a bus in itself is not micromobility, but the two work hand in glove.
Active transport, it's basically cycling, walking, wheelchairs, scooters, the two-wheeler scooter and the four-wheeler scooter.
And the integration of those with public transport.
One of the things that struck me about the word micromobility is, what is it that says that one human body walking, that is somehow seen as micro? It says something about the scale of our lives these days. Something that is small is human sized. And I was thinking about that. I was at the gym this morning, and as I walked past this huge vehicle, it was a big car, and it probably came up to about my shoulders. Now, I'm not a super tall person, so I think I'm about 165 centimeters tall or 5 foot 5, and the bonnet hung over onto the footpath area. I felt so small in comparison to this huge vehicle. I don't know, do you call it macromobility?
You call it automobility, actually. Automobility, and then you have things that are automobility scale, the width of the streets and the size of the signs. And then another term you're really describing is car bloat. What we're suffering from in Australia is car bloat, where the cars slash pickup trucks slash SUVs are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. The sad thing about that, of course, is that if you're hit by a 2.5 ton pickup truck with a 1.5, 1.6 high grille on the front, your chances of being killed are way higher than if you're hit by a small sedan with a low sloping front bonnet, where the chances you might unfortunately break a leg, but you'll probably get flipped onto the bonnet and flipped off and at least survive. So it's a product of the speed limits, which is a whole another topic, and the size and weight and frontal area of the vehicle. So yeah, you're right to feel intimidated. They are dangerous. We've just trained ourselves as a society to accept that probably shouldn't be acceptable in many cases.
I wondered if you could speak about different trends you see in bikes. There's just been a huge amount of change in these last few years. It'd be great to hear about changes in bike riding. You can say if you're buying a micromobility vehicle of some kind, then these are things to watch out for.
So I started racing in 1972 when I was 10 years old. I'm 62 years old now. Cycling has changed massively since then, and it was very much the sport of cycling, which I really lived in for a decade or more, was very much a working class sport back in those days, and it's steeped in that culture. The sport has changed dramatically. Of course, the technology has changed dramatically as well, and the popularity has increased of recreational cycling has increased a lot, which is a good thing. As far as bike changes and trends, really, if you had to pick one over all those years that's had the most impact, it's actually the one that's really only kicked in the last 5 or 6 years in Australia, serious game-changing way, and that's e-bikes and electrification. Only yesterday I was seeing a lady who was probably at least 70. I live at, not a hill, but I live at the top of a slight rise, and she was pedaling quite happily up the rise on her e-bike. She would not have been able to comfortably ride up that sort of slope without an e-bike. E-bikes have opened activity of cycling up to a vast new group of people, a much larger audience. You know, my wife's got arthritis and artificial knees and so forth, and even though I met her through bike racing, she used to race, but now she can't ride a bicycle anymore because she cannot put all her weight on one leg to start or stop on a bicycle. There's such things as electric tricycles now, so she can ride an electric tricycle. What would have been a barrier that kept her out of the market entirely and out of that activity, she's now got options that didn't exist before. So I would say if I had to pick one change in 50 plus years of close involvement with cycling, it's actually that most recent one. That would be the biggest one. As far as the bicycles, where to buy them from and so on, there was an excellent study done by Choice magazine. I don't know if you've heard of Choice. It's the Australian Consumer Association magazine, obviously online now as everything is, that's been going for decades, highly respected. They recently did a test in conjunction with Revolve Recycling in Sydney, where they bought 4 bikes, 2 bike shop bikes, 2 Kmart bikes, and they had test riders ride them regularly, ride them extensively for 6 months. And they got serviced and fixed as required by the mechanics at Revolve Recycling, so they could record what needed to be done, what spare parts or replacement parts were required, what labour, and so on. And even though the bike shop bikes were $500, $600, $700, that sort of range. So they weren't top-end racing bikes, they were economy bikes, but of a bike shop quality. And the Kmart bikes were way cheaper, like $199, $219 or whatever. Even by the time 6 months was up, the total cost of ownership was actually comparable, if not cheaper, for the bike shop bike. And that's after 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. The reality is those Kmart bikes would be in the dump and the bike shop bikes would still be giving good service. So I know for people on low incomes, it's a really tough. $500-$600 is a lot of money, but if you think of the lifetime, use of the product and the longevity of the product, there's absolutely no question in my mind that the bike shop bike is the cheaper total cost of ownership and the better value buy in the long run, not just from the straight dollar term, but then of course the utility, the joy of using it. It will be more reliable, it will be smoother, it will be more comfortable. I've always been a strong proponent for buying a bike from your local bike shop and not from a mass merchant. I know that the majority of people still buy from mass merchants in Australia, but it's not the case in Europe. It's interesting, if you go to Europe, where bikes are more seen as part of everyday life, the proportion of bikes bought in mass merchants in Europe is way lower. That's also partly a function that there aren't as many mass merchants there because there isn't the same urban sprawl like we have in Australia. But anyway, where bikes are taken seriously, their average, and by seriously I don't mean sternly, I just mean part of life, used not just a Christmas whim, then people buy bike shop bikes.
That's really good. Now, we're not saying here that we have anything particular about Kmart, particularly compared to any other big box store, so I don't want to single out just because I don't want to create litigation or anything like that.
I'll name Big W as well, or any of those mass merchants. None of them are any better than the others. Mass merchant bikes, in that particular study, Kmart was paying someone $8 to build the bike. $8. Like, what sort of quality can you build? You know, by building I mean assembling the bike. Bikes are shipped from the factories in Asia in boxes. The handlebars need to be put on, the cranks, the pedals, the wheels. Bike shop assembles every bike that is sold through their shop, and they'll take a greater care of that and test ride each bike before they put it on the showroom floor to sell it to you.
I have a friend who bought an e-bike from, I'll say, the supermarket, which has a very small range, and it has a lot of novelty products. She loves to buy new things, so she bought it. And so she gave it to me. I ended up having all these problems. I was once on quite a big intersection and it suddenly cut out in the middle. And also the gears and the controls and the electrics were dodgy. When I moved up here, I thought, I'm going to get a good proper bike, and I saw one, and I have a Cargo e-bike, a company which is very well regarded. I looked at all the reviews. It's top range, so it cost me $5,500 to give you plus accessories, so it came up to $6,000. It's a lot of money, but we don't have a car, so this was the car. And I got a couple of plastic boxes from the big box stores, and I've got little cables that go over the top, and it works a treat. I think my service bill is about $400 a year, and I have insurance. There is a mutual fund which does help low income people to be able to afford an e-bike. I don't know that company, I'm not giving any recommendation here. Always do your own due diligence for anything that you buy, but I certainly feel that when I'm on that bike, I feel really good about riding it. There is, of course, always that thing about, will it be nicked? A lot of the places that are around, there are no bike racks. One of the things that I get as a comment is, e-bikes are cheating. I'm not quite sure why being practical and sensible is called cheating.
I'll make a few comments on that. Regarding subsidies, the city of Adelaide and the city of Holdfast Bay, which is a suburb in Adelaide, have both got e-bike subsidy programs. The state of Tasmania has recently had an e-bike subsidy program. There's many e-bike subsidy programs across the USA and Europe. I think you'll see a lot more of these e-bike subsidy programs in more local governments. So maybe Moreton Bay might do that soon. Maybe you can lobby them. Watch out for that, because when they have those subsidy programs, they're oversubscribed. They're massively popular and successful, like the high profile one in Denver, Colorado, and they're up to their third or fourth of that now, and it keeps getting bigger. And you know, the subsidies are taken up in like a day or a couple of days. Really popular. As far as the e-bikes are cheating, there have been detailed studies of total exercise benefit of people riding e-bikes versus not. And yes, the level of exercise is not quite so intense. The peaks are not quite so high when you're riding an e-bike, but people ride e-bikes more often and further than they ride, I call them analog bikes now. So people ride e-bikes more and further than analog bikes, and they're still exercising at a reasonable rate, because most e-bikes are what we call pedelecs, so you have to pedal and then it senses how much you're pushing the pedals and boosts your effort proportionally. People ride more often, they're not exercising quite as intensely, but they're getting a greater volume of exercise, and especially compared to nothing. If the analog bike's just not acceptable, like the 70-plus-year-old lady riding up past my house, I totally dispute the e-bikes are cheating. They're not cheating, they're the greatest thing since sliced bread.
I absolutely agree. I have heard the term acoustic versus electric bike.
Acoustic is a popular one as well. And then there's conventional bikes or normal bikes. But you know, in the Netherlands now, the latest data, which is for the 2023 calendar year from their industry association, 80% of the value of bikes sold at retail in the Netherlands now is e-bike. And even in Australia, I follow the data quite closely for the Australian bike market. Some months, not every month, but the import value of e-bikes for the month is now higher than the import value of acoustic bikes. The volume is nowhere near that. The latest figures I just charted, we're at 28% e-bikes now, 28%. And do you know, whereas cars for 2023 were at 7.6% electric car, and yet there's billions of dollars of subsidies for electric cars, and not only are there virtually no subsidies for e-bikes, I don't know if you're aware, but there's actually a 5% tariff on e-bikes, depending on which country it's imported from. So despite having no tailwinds from the government, if you like, it's still, e-bikes have gone from nothing to 28% of the market in the space of about, really it's only the last 5 to 6 years that they've really taken off. So that, if that's not a remarkable success story, I don't know what is.
Yeah, so speaking of the Netherlands, you started riding bikes in 1989, and people have this idea about Amsterdam as always having been bike friendly. And when you recall your time back in the 80s, bike paths have come much more recent, in fact, but they broke the back of it, I guess, in the 70s. In the 80s, what was the urban infrastructure like at that time?
So I was a racing cyclist and raced initially in America and then in Europe. I initially spent some time in the Netherlands before I moved to France and raced for a team in Paris. And so I rode around the Netherlands in 1983 quite a bit. I saw it firsthand, and I've been back a few times since. It's definitely improved since. There was already quite a lot of infrastructure in 1983. Yes, you're exactly right. There was the famous Stop the Child Murders, or Stop the Kindermoord, in the early 70s, because the Netherlands had become like America, Australia, any other country after World War II, in that they'd given over their town squares for car parks and they were knocking down buildings to build new roads. But unlike Australia, America and other countries, for whatever combination of circumstances, as a society, that nation decided to take a look and stop, and it was the child death on the road that was the catalyst. But it was a long slog. I went to the Velocity conference in Nijmegen in about 2017, 2019, and I did a study tour of The Hague the day before it started, which is the capital of the Netherlands. Even then, 2017, 2019, the guide was showing us particular bits of infrastructure, and they were still having to fight tooth and nail with certain local residents or motor lobby groups or whatever to get infrastructure put in, whatever that would be, 40, 45 years after the movement started in the capital of the Netherlands. Don't assume that anything's, once you reach a certain tipping point, it's all easy. It's still often a project by project battle, if you like. Just one other point I'd make about the Netherlands. You might not be aware they've got the highest density of motorways per square kilometre of any country in the world. Now, I know it's a small country, so that makes it a bit easier. It's a small, very densely populated country. But it's not as though they don't have cars. It's just that they've made the decision that in the cities in particular, the car is a guest. You talk about the streets where car is guest. They have traffic plans, circulation plans. They don't allow a motorist to drive straight through a city centre. They have to drive around the ring road and can only go in at certain points. This is ultimately the decisions the society makes, which is reflected through the politicians of the day and so on. But they've made conscious decisions. Yes, cars are appropriate for long distance intercity travel, but they're not appropriate within their cities and for that matter, many of their suburbs.
At that conference, there was a guy called Brent Tudarian who spoke in Vancouver, and he has been instrumental in getting a lot of projects off the ground to make them more bike-friendly, pedestrian-friendly, and what's called a livable city. He said in the CBD, so in central areas like central Amsterdam or central Sydney or central Melbourne, central Brisbane, these areas are quite easy to make bike-friendly. And that's in fact what's happened. You've got wonderful bike lanes in Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. But we're on the outskirts of Brisbane, northern outskirts, and you're south of Sydney. I think it's probably quite a high car ownership town. I mean, you do have quite a good train service there that goes up into Sydney, and I think a lot of people do commute on the train, a bit like here. I did see that Wollongong has got some bike lanes, and it has been a bit more active in that in recent years. This is what I'm really frustrated with. A lot of the stuff that I see is central areas where there's good public transport, good bus service, whereas we haven't got a good bus service. We have several thousand kilometres of missing footpaths in Moreton Bay and also almost no safe bike lanes. So what I wanted to know is, how do you go about making a place more bicycle friendly on the outskirts where the infrastructure isn't so good?
It's difficult, and I'm literally looking at Google Maps of Caboolture River because that's the first thing I jumped to. I spent 7 years on what was most of that time called the Active Transport Committee for the City of Wollongong as a cycling advisor. Believe me, it's no nirvana down here in Wollongong, and it's a slog. It's a huge slog. We are on the coast. It's a very long, thin, north-south orientated city that hugs the coast. 200,000 in the city of Wollongong itself, and then you've got the city of Shell Harbour, which is essentially the same greater urban area with another 100,000, and so about 300,000 people in this relatively constrained area, because you've got the ocean down one side, you've got a range of mountains down the other side, so it's a long thin triangle. The saving grace for the city of Wollongong was that a mayor in the 1970s built a coastal bicycle path in concrete all the way from pretty much the top to the bottom. It now stretches 40 kilometres, and being on the coast, it means there's no cross streets, because by definition the ocean's always on your right hand side if you're heading north. It's not quite as straightforward as though it dips inland a bit in certain spots. That's the spine, and I've proposed what I call the 12 creek strategy, because there's a number of east-west creeks that run down from that mountain range to the sea, and those creeks are perfect opportunities to have bicycle paths because there's public land there. You can't build on the banks of a creek, it will flood, but you can build a bike path. So the first thing I would look at is the Caboolture River, and I see, unfortunately, it doesn't look like there's a cycle path along that river, because that would be a good spine to get you started. That's probably your low-hanging fruit to make a start, and then you can radiate ribs out from that spine. There's a city in America called Boulder, Colorado. Now Boulder is not totally unlike Wollongong, and I've been to Boulder a couple of times, so I've seen this firsthand. It's got the Rocky Mountains down the western side of the city. It's literally nestled into the foothills of the mountains. It's got these east-west creek lines, and they have built paths along those creek lines, and it doesn't even matter if they flood and close from time to time. Build it so it won't wash away. Okay, for a few weeks every year or two you can't ride it because it's underwater, but it's there for the other 95% of the time. That's probably your lowest hanging fruit, because it's not just there's some space there, but also it's so pleasant to ride there because you don't have the noise and those big noisy cars right at your shoulder. That's where I'd suggest to start, and you might be able to get some tourism money for that too. That's another important thing to look at. You look at rail trails and mountain bike parks, for example, especially rail trails. You can tap into a different bucket of money there, tourism department. That's a big bucket. There's been a lot of money spent. Look at the Northern Rivers Rail Trail, the Brisbane Valley Rail Trail. A lot of money to be spent on rail trails with huge benefits.
There is the Caboolture to Wamuran Rail Trail, and if our listener would like to join us for our Saturday morning slow ride. It's the 4th Saturday of the month, and we leave 8 a.m. from the Beerburrum Road end, and then we cycle all the way very slowly, gently, family friendly. You can come in a bike, a wheelchair, a trike, or if you're really fit, you could run alongside it. That's great advice. I've been a bit funny on the tourist side of things just because I just don't want to be overrun with tourists. I think it's I love what we've got here. But I do know somebody who's a specialist in that area. I'm sure you know him too. He's an academic in the space. I might see if I can get him on the show. When you started, you said that bike riding or cycling was actually a working class sport. I got an email from a bicycle user group nearby, and they wrote me this: "We aren't Caboolture, we are a different demographic." It was absolutely appalling, the language that was used, because they were of a better class, and there's no doubt that that's what this person thought. My sense is that there is this class division in the Lycra biker world. I personally just don't like the look of the Lycra. I don't know what it is about that, but I don't like the Lycra look. I can't quite figure out what bothers me, but I really don't. I love going everywhere by bikes, but it feels like that's poor man's transport. Not quite there with the bus, because I think the bus is definitely seen as poor man's transport, and I love buses. What were your thoughts about bicycles as, lower class transport, and some of the differences between bike riding and cycling, the competitive side, middle class?
Well, I think there's cultures within cultures. You've got your mammals, middle-aged men in Lycra. Then you've got your offals, which is what I am now. You graduate from being a mammal to an offal. Yeah, I can see from your face you're wondering, old farts in Lycra. So I don't know when. I'd say 60 is when you graduate from mammal to offal. There's the triathlon culture. There's mountain bikes. Within mountain bikes, you've got downhillers and cross country, and then you've got bike packers and adventurers and gravel riders. You've got BMX racers, BMX freestyle. There's so many cultures and subcultures. I think the critical thing is we really are all ultimately after the same things, and we need to get along, and we need to, wherever we can, try and bring people together and lessen those class distinctions and look for common ground.
In the 80s or in the 70s, were people wearing Lycra?
Lycra wasn't really. I remember the first time at a national track cycling titles, I saw the first bit of Lycra in the flesh, and I was like, what is this weird shiny thing? We used to wear wool jerseys and wool nicks in the early 70s, and they were awful when it rained, and I can tell you they were heavy. It was like wearing a nappy and itchy. So Lycra is far, far better. There's no question about that. Yeah, I'll wear Lycra on the weekend when I'm going out for a 2-hour road ride on a carbon fibre road bike, but then I'll wear my working clothes when I'm riding to one of my coaching clients on my daughter's Gazelle e-bike, which is on long-term loan to me. And then I'll take the kids out to the bike park on their little kids' bikes, and we've got a tag-along bike, which is on the back of a Townie, which is a balloon-tired bike. So we've got quite a collection of bikes in the shed next door to where I'm talking to you, and I definitely don't see myself as just a mammal or an offal for that matter, or whatever. If you've got a bit of security, you can alternate from one to another. It's fine. But if I'm going to do a 50k road ride, I'm not going to do it in my street clothes on a balloon tired bike. Put my Lycra on. It's all about the chamois, you see. That's the secret. The bit that you sit on, the padded bit. And by the way, you mustn't wear underpants as well, because that's another little secret for you. And they have all sorts of lotions and potions that they put on the chamois. Aussie buck cream. Too much information. It's all about comfort. It's all about, believe it or not, the Lycra is actually, form follows function, and it's about doing what's comfortable. If you're going to do a 2-hour 50k ride, let's not get too hung up on the differences, and let's just enjoy it. There's been a really good campaign down in Wollongong about showing cyclists in their bike gear, whatever it might be, and their day clothes, split right down the middle, like half, showing that cyclists are people. We're fathers, we're grandfathers, and so forth. That should not be forgotten. Even the word cyclists, it really should be, wherever possible, people who ride bikes. Just getting back to the Netherlands, the Dutch don't consider themselves cyclists. Bikes are just part of their everyday life because it's the quickest and cheapest and easiest way to do their life and get to where they want to get to. They don't consider themselves cyclists. So that's ultimately where we want to get, and not having cyclists and non-cyclists. We're just people who ride bikes as part of our life and transportation mix, and other times it might suit us to walk or catch the bus or drive or whatever. That's where we need to get to.
Yeah, I agree. You've got a podcast. If you want to tell people the name of the podcast and when it will be coming to air.
Well, it's the Micromobility podcast. We haven't set a launch date yet, but it won't be too far away. The place to go is micromobilityreport.com.au. That's our website. There's a free newsletter, only comes out every 2 months, but you're welcome to subscribe. All things micromobility are discussed there.
You do also coach bike shops in how to become more financially viable, which bikes to buy, which vendors, and how to sort of think about selling bikes. Actually, I do know somebody who was interested in starting a repair shop. Perhaps I'll send him your way, and so that he can get some solid advice. I think that's everything, unless there's anything else you want to add. No, I think it's been a great conversation. Thank you so much. And it's really good to hear and perhaps be a little bit controversial about things.
I promise that Kmart won't sue you. I've been criticising Kmart for 20 years and I've not heard a peep from them.
The attitudes are your own. We are here to
opinion.
entertain and inform. We are not giving any advice. That's what we have on one of our other podcasts. So, well, thanks very much, Phil.
Thanks, Wendy.
Thanks, Phil. Bye.
Thanks for enjoying Streets and People, presented by Get Around Cabo Car Free. We publish our podcast regularly at the usual places and on our website, where you can find out more about us. getaroundcabocarfree.com.au. That's www.getaround, get around, that's pretty straightforward. Cabo, C-A-B-O, that's short for Caboolture. Car Free, C-A-R-F-R-E-E. There's no hyphen in that. .com.au. Our theme music is The Thief on AM Sound, which is just like our cars on our streets, always stealing the space. So let's stop that thief.